I want to welcome everyone to Professional Resumes and Cover Letters. My name is Vanessa, and I'm the writing coach at the School of Social Work. I work with students on different writing support concerns like um, organization, structure, deciphering assignments, and guidelines. But I also work with students on their resumes and their cover letters. So if you are applying to an internship or getting ready for graduation, feel free to reach out and we can work together on developing a resume. And I think you'll get a lot out of this presentation today. Because there are so few of you, feel free to interrupt and ask questions. I'm more than happy to answer them. And if you would like to follow up with an email with some questions, I'd be happy to answer. So resumes and cover letters work together to gain the interest of the prospective employer. Um, they also work together during an interview. I don't like to say that a cover letter is an extension of a resume. I think cover letters really work to highlight your skills in relation to the position for which you are applying. So I think it's important to look at that, to look at cover letters that way. And they always need to target a specific audience and describe your relevant skills, experience, and accomplishments. So essentially, they're custom for the position. I know some students like the idea of creating one resume for multiple positions, multiple jobs, but unfortunately, that doesn't help you stand out or highlight your skills. And so it requires a little more work and a little more organization. So I don't know if Lauren sent this out, but I have a copy. And if you're interested in this, I can send it out to you. But I ask students to really write down a lot of their information before we begin building the resume. So a lot of their personal information, their education, and other like certifications, professional development opportunities. I'd like to see that written and thought out first, similar to the way we build an outline for a paper. And then we go on to structure the resume. So you want to think about the skill sets you believe belong in your resume and why they belong there. You want to spend some time with this worksheet at home as you build your professional profile. And you want to also remember that this document is constantly evolving as you attend professional development opportunities, volunteer, build your education and your employment experience. So it's not just done and then you don't have to revisit it for another 5 years. It's something that's constantly growing and evolving. You want to ask, who am I? You want to reflect on your professional life, your volunteer life, and your accomplishments. What populations and settings interest you, what populations and settings have you worked in, and this will help you decide what to include in your resume, what to emphasize, and the appropriate terminology. Always start by researching the organization where you will be sending your resume, browse their websites, check out their social media, learn about their mission, their programs, the populations they serve, and their theory base. That's where you begin to form the relationship between your skill set and the organization's mission and values. I always tell students to create a main list similar to that resume worksheet we saw a few slides ago, where you're keeping track of all of your education, your certifications, your licensing, the dates, your field placements, all of your volunteer positions, again, professional development opportunities, webinars you've attended, anything. We want to keep a main list of that. And then from there, we would build a resume custom for a position. We definitely want to, in general, avoid adding information like our personal interest, activities, and travel on a professional resume. However, in some cases, these things are necessary. So if you are, for example, a social worker looking at art therapy, having personal interests in the art world are helpful on a resume because it helps a prospective employer learn and understand how seriously you take this role, and that this is something you pursue outside of work as well. Always list information in reverse chronological order from past to present. Employers are most familiar with this format. We always want to choose headings to emphasize relevant skills and experience. So clinically focused resumes will typically begin with education and focus on education and research areas, followed by social work or clinical experience. Um, Other background information could be labeled additional experience or teaching and research. So again, you have to think about what you've done, and then we have to organize that information um, according to your specific skills. And then for macro level positions, headings may be a little bit different. So human service experience or community outreach experience and administrative experience. In some cases, handling budgets. All of that has to go into a macro level position resume. We want to avoid using templates for lots of reasons. They're difficult to modify. So once you've created a resume using a template, it's often difficult to go in then and start editing it constantly. And then another big reason is if you happen to be applying to a very large organization that sees a lot of volume of resumes coming in, some of them use software to help process resumes. And oftentimes that software does not recognize templates. And so your resume could just not be chosen or not move on to the next stage. So always start from a fresh blank sheet. We always want to use verb phrases and not sentences. So, and avoid personal pronouns in our resume. So instead of I did this, it's I developed and implemented. Or developed and implemented, not using personal pronouns. It's acceptable to use them in a cover letter. We want to avoid them in the resume because we're looking for more short and concise and to the point bullets. And so long explanations aren't needed in a resume. And those are usually reserved for the interview. We always want to use keywords. Again, if we're applying to an organization that is using this software, you want to match your language to the language that's in the actual job description. So for clinical positions, you may want to include information about your client population, such as their diagnoses and presenting issues, age and ethnicity. And then for macro level positions, you want to stress supervising others, program development, community organizing, fundraising, grant writing. You always want to quantify your resume as much as possible. So you want to include the number of people you have supervised or the amount of money you've raised, and you want to use less clinical language for these positions. Definitely stress your accomplishments and sequence your phrases according to the skills that are most relevant to your reader. So you may have like a breadth of experience, but you only need certain skill sets for a specific position. Those are the ones you want to highlight in a resume. You can list less relevant information later in your descriptions, or you can completely omit it. Resume sections are going to vary student to student, and again, from clinical positions to macro positions, but definitely your contact information is important. So your name at the top, phone number and email address. If you are not comfortable placing your street address on a resume, I think it's completely appropriate to name your city and have a contact, either phone number or email address. I don't think it's necessarily needed to have an exact location, especially if you at some point decide to post your resume somewhere where it could be seen publicly. We would definitely want to avoid that personal information. Professional profile can be optional. In some cases, it's really critical to have one, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But it's a brief statement stating the type of position you're seeking or the skills that you are wanting to highlight. It's very short and concise, and it can limit the amount of room you have in your resume. So it's not always something that we want to use, but sometimes it can be very helpful. Our skills profile is possible for certain resumes. So these are always located at the top of your resume. So if you're mid-career, sometimes having a skills-based resume is the way to go, because it's going to list what you can do and how well you do it. Whereas education then falls lower. If you're coming out of school or you're seeking research or positions in education, you definitely want to take your education and move it up, and your skills gets pushed down. So it all depends on the kind of resume you're writing and the types of positions, again, for which you're applying. Skills, again, could include foreign language proficiency, computer skills, or progress toward your licensure. So if you're limited license, you want to name that. Your professional experience could be chosen based on the position you're seeking. State the specifics of your field placement, especially for clinical resumes. Always include your volunteer work or your internships. Personal information like your age, your family status, religion, political affiliations, ethnicity, those are not included, obviously, on a resume. Also, like I mentioned earlier, personal interests are typically not, but if your personal information falls in line with a position like art therapy or outdoor therapy, and you're a hiker or have outdoor skills, then they would be relevant. I always use our neighbor as an example, who's a traveling nurse. And so travel is a big part of her personal interests, and she travels for work. And so it's pertinent to have her interest there. We always want to make sure that our relevant memberships are listed on our resume, including our NASW membership, our awards, any trainings, conferences. Right now, obviously, what webinars or online conferences, presentations that you may have presented at conferences, those also always have to be included. So the way your resume is presented always depends on your audience. So we think back to writing, we have to think about our audience when we're writing a paper. It's the same with the resume. If you can fit your resume on one page without crowding it, we can do that. But for clinical positions, mid-career positions, if we have advanced degrees, we might be looking at a 2-page resume, and that's completely okay. I think if you have relevant information to add, we shouldn't shy away from a 2-page resume. Be sure to use consistent formatting throughout a resume. So if you're bolding certain headings, make sure you bold them throughout. Italics, same thing. You can do what you want to do, just be consistent with it. Acceptable fonts include Times New Roman, Arial, and Helvetica. We want to keep it to 11 or 12 points. Be sure to proofread. A resume is always a direct reflection of you. I've always met with students who sometimes say to me, I was in a hurry, I didn't have a lot of time, and so it just was submitted this way. And I always tell students, you have to take the time to proofread, because it's the first, it's the first introduction of yourself to prospective employer, particularly if you're applying to a smaller organization or agency, where your resume might go directly to the person who's hiring you and the person you may be interviewing with. So be sure to check the formatting. Always send the resume to yourself or to a friend so they can open up the file and make sure it all looks good. You can label and send as a PDF, although depending on the organization and the types of software they use to process resumes, sometimes they don't read PDF files. So you always want to note what files they prefer. Sometimes it's PDF, sometimes it's Word. So this leads into applicant tracking systems, which I mentioned earlier. It's a software that is used by recruiters and employers to collect and sort resumes as they receive them. These are typically used, the software is typically used by larger organizations processing hundreds of resumes. And so I don't know how common this is for social work students, but I wanted to note it in the event that, you know, we had social work students applying to hospital systems where I think this type of software is used. They scan specific keywords to determine if the resume should be passed along. So that's why it's important to use language you see in the job description in your own resume. I don't believe that smaller organizations really use this as frequently. Typically, you're just directly emailing your resume, but sometimes it needs to be uploaded on a website that does use this software. So just take note as to how your resume will be presented to the prospective employer. For your resume to be read by the software, you definitely want to stay away from fancy templates, like I mentioned earlier. You want to avoid graphics and pictures, charts, tables. Be sure you identify the compatible format that they want your resume uploaded on, and also include the key language found on the job description. So here are some resume examples. This resume focuses on experience. This individual has a LinkedIn account, which you don't need, but if it's something you feel comfortable starting, it would be helpful for a recruiter or hiring manager to see. This person is focusing on their education, their licensure, their language proficiency, which is up on top. So if you have a language proficiency, we like to see that up. They also want to note their CPR because this particular individual works with children. And then they have their experience, which it constitutes internships for this person. So this is a good example of what we like to see. No fancy templates, no fancy fonts or colors. Then this person goes on to go down the line of their position. So group leader, assistant director, they're noting their trainings and their conferences, their professional affiliations and their interests. If you have any volunteer experience, that would go down here as well. So again, you're tailoring it to the position. I like this example a lot because this is like a mid-career resume where we're focusing more on skills, and we don't see education on this page. So this individual is starting with a summary that looks at their professional life and then their clinical, academic, and private practice experience. Note that at this point in someone's career, where they went to school isn't as critical as what they've done in the time since graduation. This example is someone who's pursuing more academic research type work. So their graduate field work is critical, related experience, and then computer skills and community service fall at the bottom. Cover letters is a way for you to introduce your resume to your employer. It states why you're writing, how you may have heard of the position, and then it will highlight your most relevant skills and experience, and then align them with the position and the mission of your organization that you're applying to. Cover letters don't repeat the resume, and they show where you and the position and the organization again fit together. And we always want to use a cover letter. So again, this involves having to research the organization and the position before we submit anything, exploring the website or talking with someone who may have knowledge of this organization or the position. And if you have been referred by someone, it's okay to mention that in the cover letter. If you are applying for a position that doesn't have a lot of information, it is completely appropriate for you to contact the organization for further information on the position. But if it's a small organization, you may end up speaking with the person who ultimately hires or interviews you. So make sure you're prepared for that conversation. Always address the letter to a person if you you can. And again, it's appropriate to contact the organization um, to find that person. But if you can't, for whatever reason, it's okay to say dear director, search committee, or to whom it may concern. I like to use business letter format in full block, but because that's the most professional. So I would go that direction. And again, if you have questions on what this looks like or what this means, you can feel free to reach out. But I think I have a sample here I can show you. Definitely always write in the active voice. So this is where you highlight your skills and your experience. So instead of saying my field placement at Cass Community Services afforded me the opportunity, we would say during my placement at Cass Community Services, I provided individual psychotherapy to adolescent substance abuse patients. So you're being more concise, more specific, and you're using, more direct language. Instead of saying I would be honored to work at your agency, which to me is just kind of fluff, I would rather you say I would bring strong clinical and administrative skills to your agency. And again, it's about being very specific, very concise, because cover letters should always be one page. So we always keep it one page, unless again we're applying for academic positions, research, or fellowship positions. And then our paragraphs stay on the shorter side for a cover letter. At the end, we definitely want to carve out a path for an interview. So you want to end the letter with the next step. So it's appropriate to say, I'll contact you next week, or I will contact you to schedule a convenient time to meet. Also, you may want to offer the best way to reach you and that you look forward to hearing from them. Now, when it comes to actually sending out your resume and your cover letter and it's going via email, you definitely want to write something in the body of that email, but you want to keep that very short and brief. So you would say something like, I am writing to apply for the clinical position advertised on your website. I will be receiving my MSW from Wayne State in August, and I bring these skills to this organization. It's just real quick, really concise, and clear language. This is an example of a cover letter I like, and I call this like a recipe for a cover letter. Our first paragraph is an introduction. So this is who I am. I'm applying because I saw this position here. I'm receiving my MSW degree, and I will bring these skills to your organization. So it's an intro. Our second paragraph talks a little bit about and highlights the skills that we used at our former agency, and how those skills integrate with the position I'm applying for now. And the third paragraph really focuses on the research you've done on the organization. So I am particularly attracted to Blue Mountain's structured, safe, nurturing residential environment and comprehensive approach to therapeutic, academic, social, and physical needs of each student. So you've done the research on this organization, you know what they do, you know their mission, you are very clear on the population they serve. And I think that says a lot about you, about a candidate. And then we close out carving out a path for a next step. So this is a typical cover letter, what I like to see students submit to organizations. References should always appear on a separate page. We definitely want to include name, title, address, phone number, and email for each, and the relationship you have with that individual. We want to choose references that we feel will speak highly of our work and abilities. So it could be a field supervisor, instructor, or former employer. And their thoughts on your strengths, that you'll bring to this new position and the qualifications. So always choose someone, if you can, in the human service field, and also choose someone you've had more recent communication with. Also, you want to make sure they're prepared to say something in the event that they're contacted, and make sure you have permission from your references to be contacted by an organization. So now we're going to get into a little bit on employment gaps, which in the age of COVID, we've seen an increase of. So if we have an employment gap, we're not alone. And there are lots of reasons why people have employment gaps, and it's becoming more common. Even pre-COVID was becoming more common, and they could range, from having an illness to caring for family members like aging parents, children, or partners. We maybe left a position to pursue an advanced degree, and frankly, some organizations downsized, and that has happened too. So lots of reasons why you'd see a gap in a resume. COVID-19 has presented job seekers with more challenges in seeking a new job, but the news really isn't all grim, simply because most of us are kind of in the same boat. We're all riding through a global pandemic together. But I think it's important to be transparent with a prospective employer if you're seeing large gaps in employment. So we don't want to hide that, because it is becoming more uncommon. And positions that transitioned to remote work in 2020 sort of redefine what it means to be a contributor and a productive employee. So employment's evolving. And I think working from home is becoming much more accepted. So again, we don't want to shy away from what's going on in our lives. But a way that we can highlight our skills and kind of take away the attention from the employment gap is to create that professional profile that I talked about earlier, and include skills that fit most with the job description. And I think having that is really important at the top before an employer and a prospective employer gets to the employment gap. They're already aware of the skills that you're bringing to the position. Also, if you've had the ability to volunteer, provide community service, or had the opportunity to attend professional development opportunities, now is the time to really illustrate and outline that in a resume, to sort of combat that employment gap. You definitely want to be prepared to address it. I'm not suggesting that students are, go into great detail, but if it has something to do with education or caregiving responsibilities, you definitely want to be forthright about it, and also recognize and explain that that reason has been resolved. So if it was for education and you've completed that, now your attention is fully on the position. If there was some downsizing, you can discuss that without disrespecting the organization, briefly and by being transparent. Depending on where you are in your career, I also advise that you could create a skills-based resume that highlights your skills rather than the dates and the jobs and the duties that you had. You would still have an employment history on a resume, but we would focus more on the skills you have. So before we upload a resume and cover letter, we want to ensure we're using action verbs, we're using clear, concise language, we're providing brief descriptions, but we're being specific about the populations we served or the social work skills we've practiced, that we are quantifying our contributions to organizations we've been with in the past. We use professional language, consistent with formatting, always send a cover letter. We want to avoid personal pronouns in our resumes, avoid personal data, avoid graphics or photos, charts, anything like that. We don't need the street address of a former employer or school. Watch out for grammatical errors and avoid sending the resume without the cover letter. This is me and my email address. If you're interested in scheduling an appointment, you can do so using WAMS. Does anybody have any questions?
Feel free to unmute yourself to ask any questions. and or put it in the chat?
Let's see the chat. Yes. So I can take this and email it to Lawrence, and then Lawrence posts it. Is that what we do?
Yes, we can do it that way. If everyone can put their email address in the chat, because the RSVP link is down.
Actually, if you do that, I'll write down your email addresses and I'll send it today.
Okay.
I have another question. I was wondering how old your volunteer work experience should be, because I have some from like 2011 and 2012, and I don't know if that still should be written on a resume or not.
So with any employment, I always say within the last 10 to 15 years, that depends on whether you're going into academic research, which you go further back than that, like if you're going in that down that road. But typically I say 10 to 15 years. And for volunteer experience, I would say anything within the last 5 years.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anything else? Okay, I think I have everybody's email address.
I have a question about the employment gap. If your employment gap is not brought up, should you bring it up or just be prepared to discuss it if it's asked?
Don't bring it up, and just be prepared to discuss it if it does come up.
Okay, thank you.
Because if they're not bringing it up, it means it doesn't matter. And I think it's going to matter less and less as we emerge from this pandemic. And like I said, employment gaps were common pre-pandemic anyway, with aging baby boomers and people leaving positions temporarily to care for parents, to raise families. So it's not unusual to have one. And if they're not bringing it up, it means they're well aware of it and don't have questions about it.
So I have a question as well. Currently, like all of my information is listed at my mom's house in Lake Orion. I live in Ferndale, and I plan to relocate here to Ferndale in the next month or so. I mean, so like on my resume, do you think I should list the address on my license, or should I list the address that I'm at in Ferndale right now?
I would likely list Ferndale, Michigan.
Okay.
Your permanent address sounds like Lake Orion. That looks like, or sounds like it might change.
Mhm.
I think if you are willing to drive long distances and don't have an issue with distance, you can list whichever, but I think it's fair to say that you'll be traveling from Ferndale to a position.
Right.
So Ferndale would be what I would put there.
Okay. All right. I just didn't know if there was going to be a disconnect, or I just didn't want to explain to them that my address is there for insurance purposes. So.
Yeah, and that's not unusual either.
Yeah.
To have, my sister lives in Chicago, and she had my parents here, her address listed in Michigan, really until a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So that's not unusual.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Anything else?
One more question. I'm sorry. So on the dues, you said to put the address of your school or employment, or should we not? I think it's a include street address of your former schools and employers. Oh,
Nope,
it's don't. Okay, maybe I read the wrong thing.
Yep. Yeah, no, we don't need to know like the street addresses of like Wayne State or your former employers. We just need to know maybe where they were located or the location. If you worked for Beaumont Hospital, was it the Royal Oak campus or the Dearborn campus?
Okay.
But we don't have to have the address for that. And there would be no need for it anyway.
Okay.
I think what I did say that if you don't, that it's not really necessary either to put your actual street address, like at 123 Orchard Lane. I don't know that that's really relevant. Some people have it, and that's fine if you're comfortable putting your address down, but it doesn't really mean anything.
Okay. And then when you put your starting time at your like former employment to the end date, do you usually put just the month and the year?
Yes.
In the month and the year. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Cool.
All right.